Hello and welcome to my Yu-Gi-Oh channel. Make sure to like the video if you enjoy it, make sure to comment, and don't forget to subscribe. Any support is much appreciated. Today we're going to be covering the rares which I found within the Duel Links main box 30, also known as Shining Hope. So the first card we have is Virginity Susanoo. It's a light attribute beast warrior, exceeds monster. It's a rank 4 with 2,400 attack and 1,600 defense. It requires 2 level 4 bujin monsters, and its effect is this card can attack all monsters your opponent controls once each. Once per turn, you can detach 1 exceeds material from this card, take 1 bujin monster from your deck, and either add it to your hand or send it to the graveyard. You can only control 1 Virginity Susanoo. This is, I would say, actually better than the previous Bujinity Exceeds monster for a couple of reasons. First, it's slightly bigger in terms of it's more offensive, with the 2,400 versus the 1,800 of the previous one. It is very specific, though. It does require you to have 2 Bujin monsters, so unless you're running a Bujin deck, this card is not viable as an extra deck monster. The ability to attack all of your opponent's monsters means that you can actually wipe them all out, especially if you pair it with something like Power of the Guardians that can give it a 500 point boost every time it attacks. If your opponent has a full field, by the end of that turn you've got a 3,900 attack monster, assuming they haven't used anything which is trying to destroy this monster. Essentially, also, it means by getting rid of the Exceeds materials, you're able to search for other Bujin monsters you have anyway. Certain Bujins will have effects which trigger in the graveyard, so you can do that. Essentially, also, it means that if you've got one of those Bujin monsters that has that effect that can activate in the graveyard as well, you're detaching something to help support you a little bit further as well, or you could always choose to add something to your hand, which might be better depending on how far the game state is. So the next card we have is Swordbreaker. This is an Earth Attribute Warrior Exceeds monster. It's a rank 6 with 2,700 defense and 1,000 defense. It requires 2 level 6 monsters, and the effect is, once per turn you can detach 1 Exceeds material from this card to declare 1 monster type. This card gains the following effect. At the start of the damage step, if this card battles a monster of a type that has been declared, destroy that monster. So this card can instantly get rid of cards. Because this is at the start of the damage step, you don't actually have to go into your battle phase. It's not saying at the end of the damage step, so you can get rid of very offensive threats your opponent might have immediately. The downside I have is that I think how it works is that's dependent on the type you're facing. So if you're facing a deck which is all of one type, that's brilliant. Say they're all machines, you declare machine, but it is only when this card battles. So that means your opponent is still able to use spell or traps to try and get rid of this. But if they're running a very mixed type of deck and it's not really type oriented, of course you can use the effect again to change the type this card is actually running over, but then you're changing these and your opponent's going to use some sort of strategy to try and confuse you. It is a bit of a waste, but I can't remember what set it's in, but I can understand why. It's one of the more basic and less complicated Exceeds monsters to introduce to the game. Granosaurus is a Fire Attribute Dinosaur Exceeds monster. It's a rank 3 with 2,000 attack and 1,900 defense. It requires 2 level 3 monsters, and the effect is when this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, you can detach 1 Exceeds material from this card to inflict 1,000 damage to your opponent. I know this card has been, I think this was either in this initial pack that came out for this set or the second pack. Because it's one of the more basic Exceeds monsters. It was kind of introduction to Exceeds monsters, if you will. This is why it was brought out. For the time being, it's quite relevant. It's a nice bit of effect damage, 1,000 points. Although saying that, they've recently introduced the whole thing with duel links, that burn cards do half the amount of damage they used to. So really, what the 2,000 damage you would have done before with the two materials now only does 1,000 if you get both off. That makes this card a little bit less viable, but still it's a 2,000 attack monster. It's okay. Shining Elf is a wind attribute spellcaster, rank 2 with 1,600 attack and 1,000 defense. The effect is when your opponent normal or special summons a monster, except during a damage step, you can detach one Xyz material from this card. That monster loses 500 attack. It's okay considering it only needs 2 level 2 monsters to bring itself out. My problem with it is it's only 500 points different. Your opponent is probably going to either not attack if it happens to be lower than this card, or essentially try and get rid of this before that effect is able to trigger, because they want their monster to have as many attack points as possible. Alternatively, if they're playing a strategy like with the, I think it's the sub-terror archetype, where they like to flip-flop all over the place, when they flip themselves face down, that attack reduction doesn't stick, and then when they flip themselves up, they get to trigger their effects anyway, so in certain cases, it's not going to make that much difference, and this card is just meh for them. Gaga Clerk is an Earth attribute warrior, level 2 with 400 attack and 800 defense. The effect is if you control a Gaga monster other than Gaga Clerk, you can special summon this card from your hand. It being a level 2 at the moment does not make much difference. I mean, I suppose you could use it just to bring out that Shining Elf, because you can actually adapt Gaga Magician's level back down to 2 from its original 4 in order to bring it out, but otherwise at the moment it's not really that relevant. So the next card we have is Zubababa Buster. It's a Earth attribute warrior, level 3 with 1,800 attack and 600 defense. The effect is if this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent, at the end of the damage step, destroy the one face-up monster on the field that has the lowest attack. Your choice if tied, and if you do, this card loses 800 attack. Really, this card isn't that great. I mean, unless your opponent has a number of cards, and chances are they're not going to keep a weenie on the field. They're going to keep decent-sized monsters. So this effect is more than likely not to even trigger at all. As it is, it's one of the weaker cards of the series, and I wouldn't even entertain looking at this card, nor putting it in the deck. So we've got Dodo Bot. It's an Earth attribute machine, level 4 with 1,800 attack and 1,900 defense. The effect is it cannot be normal summoned, but can be normal set. If this card attacks, it is unaffected by other card effects until the end of the damage step. This is really good when you think of trying to use it against lots of different, battle traps or things that can activate during the battle phase. The issue is it's a 2-turn to even get this effect to work, because you have to set it first, and then the next turn you can essentially flip summon it into attack mode. It's a big issue for this card, and it's one of the reasons why I would struggle to kind of justify using it. It's got balanced stats, which is the benefit, but its benefits are kind of weighed by its losses, unless of course you're just aiming to use this as tribute fodder. Okay, so now we have Dodo Buster. It's an Earth attribute warrior, level 6 with 1,900 attack and 800 defense. The effect is if only your opponent controls a monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. If summoned this way, its level becomes 4. When this card is tribute summoned, you can target one Dodo monster in your graveyard, special summon that target in defense position. I would have to say I have actually seen some people who have in the beginning of when it came out on Duel Links, just played this card without understanding what or how to really use it. They've kind of just brought it out thinking, oh, it's a 1900 attack monster, my opponent cannot get over that. Only to find I've got either a spell or trap that just gets rid of it, and it's no longer a problem. To use this effectively, you want to be able to kind of special summon it, because that way it becomes a level 4, you can then normal summon something else, and then you can go into your Utopia. That's the general idea of it. Or essentially you could also just tribute over a card, assuming you've got a dodo in your graveyard, to special summon that dodo, and then you're able to then maybe exceed using either existing cards you've got on the field, or do something with them, you know, I don't know, United We Stand as an example, just to boost this up, you know, to have a bit more field presence. The next card is Satella Knight Vega. It's a light attribute warrior, level 4, with 1200 attack and 1600 defense. Its effect is, if this card is summoned, you can special summon one Tellarknight monster from your hand, except itself. You can only use this effect of Satella Knight Vega once per turn. So this is the one I was mentioning that is able to actually special summon another of your Tellarknights. They're all being level 4s, means you can go into any of your level 4 Xyz monsters, and there's no real restrictions on this card. You can go into Utopia, you can go into your Deltarus, you can go into various other Xyz monsters, so long as they're rank 4. The only restriction on this is that it can only use the effect once per turn, but really, when you think of it, it's not that big of a restriction. The next card is Satella Knight calhai. It's a light warrior attribute, level 4 with 1800 attack and 1000 defense. If this card is summoned, you can send one Tellarknight card from your deck to the graveyard, except itself. You can only use this effect of Satella Knight calhai once per turn. This is a card that it acts very much like one of the like Armageddon Knight or something along those lines, the attribute knights, which actually send an attribute of their of the specific choosing from the deck to the graveyard. This is so you can use Altair to then bring that card back and then go into an instant Xyz monster, rank 4 Xyz monster. That's the whole purpose. This is how it makes it easier to bring out things like Deltarus. The Chinky Wolf is a light attribute beast type level 4 with 1100 attack and 2000 defense. The effect is other beast, beast warrior, and winged beast type monsters you control cannot be destroyed by battle. Essentially, this makes itself a giant target. If you're able to set this on your first turn, your opponent attacks into this and they can't get over that 2000 defense. That actually helps you because all of the bujin monsters are one of those 3 types that I've mentioned in the effect, which means until they get rid of this card, they can't destroy your other monsters in battle. This is one way of kind of using a beatdown type of strategy to kind of overwhelm your opponent, because as soon as they try and clear something, unless they have the spell or traps or the monster effects from it, they can't really do anything until they draw into those cards. You can actually speed through your deck and build up your presence to defeat your opponent. So Bujingi Crow is a light attribute winged beast type level 4 with 1700 attack and 800 defense. The effect is when a beast warrior type bujin monster you control is targeted for an attack by an opponent's monster, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard, negate the attack, and if you do, inflict damage to your opponent equal to half the attacker's attack. You can only use this effect of Bujingi Crow once per turn. A lot of the Bujin Beast Warrior type monsters are ones where you can only have one of. This is because most of the other cards just act as some kind of protection or do things to either boost effects or destruction effects, as is the case for here. This acts a bit like a small version of a negate attack. It shuts down that initial battle and it actually removes the offending monster as well. Being able to do the burn is the cherry on top, because if your opponent foolishly goes and attacks that monster, you can just end the game out like that, rather than actually having to do anything else. The next card we have is Green Dustin. It's a wind attribute fiend type level 1 with 0 attack and 1000 defense. The effect is it cannot be used as a fusion, synchro, or exceeds material for a summon. While this card is face up on the field, it cannot be tributed. When this card on the field is destroyed, the controller targets one spell or trap card they control. Return that target to the hand. You can only control one face up Green Dustin. I can't remember what the Dustins do, but I think there is some kind of benefit to having them. There's cards later down the line, I think White Dustin and Black Dustin, who actually gain attack or are like the boss versions of the Dustins. But all the other ones really don't have any advantage for you. They can't be gotten rid of. They can't be used for anything. No fusion, synchro, exceeds, or tributing. So at the moment, they're not that useful, and I think they're just a bit of a pack filler. Next card is Achacha Chambara. It's a fire attribute warrior level 3 with 1400 attack and 400 defense. During either player's turn, when a card or effect is activated, that will inflict damage when it resolves. You can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, inflict 400 damage to your opponent. This relies on an effect that does some kind of damage, so if you are doing the damage yourself, that's good because you get an extra 400 off. And essentially, because it special summons itself, you can go into rank 3 pretty easily. The issue is if you're trying to rely on your opponent to do something, that's never a good idea. Always better to have your level of control than trying to, try and tempt your opponent into doing something when they're probably not running that style of deck anyway. Generally speaking, it's not a great card to use, and it's not even that consistent. There are many other burn cards that do a much better job. Also remember, with the whole Duel Links changes, burn effects do damage. This would only do 200 damage, which is negligible at best. The next card we have is Mimimike. It's an Earth attribute machine, level 3, with 300 attack and 300 defense. The effect is if your opponent controls a monster and you control a level 3 monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. You can only special summon Mimimike once per turn this way. It's just one of the series of cards that Yuma had, which were just so that you had another monster special summoned of that specific level, so you can go into that specific rank. Generally, there is no other effect to it. It's incredibly weak, and to the extent it reminds me a little bit like, Unibicular, Bicycular, Tricycular, those 3 series of cards, which were just there, really just to be used as synchro material. The next card is Tatakawa Knight. It's a Earth attribute warrior level 4 with 1500 attack and 0 defense. The effect is if the activation of your spell or trap card is negated by an opponent's card effect, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard to inflict 1500 points of damage. This is incredibly risky, and although it's a decent card, it is just not likely to go off. My issue with it is it does require your spell or trap to be negated by your opponent. If your opponent doesn't run things like that, if they're not running really like a counter-based deck, so, the counter fairies or something similar to that, this might just be a card that's stuck in your hand, or potentially, just a card that you have to use, which its stats aren't great. Even 1500 isn't great these days, even just for Duel Links. It reminds me a bit of you've got Elephant Statue of the Blessing, and you've got the Disaster one as well. It reminds me, it's a little bit like that, but this is actually, it's better in that it's less specific, but it does less damage as well at the same time, so it's a bit of a trade-off. Gaga Draw is basically your go-to pot of greed for the Gaga archetype. you banish 3 gaga monsters from your graveyard, and then you draw 2 cards. It's a decent thing, you know, if you're not needing those 3 gaga monsters, it's always better just to, you know, trade those off for something where you might be able to draw into something much better. Xyz unit is an equip spell with the effect equip only to a face-up Xyz monster. It gains attack equal to its rank times 200. If the equipped monster you control would detach its Xyz material to activate its effect, you can detach this card as one of the Xyz materials. At the moment, this card is okay. If you use it for one of the higher ranked monsters, you've got Force Focus, you've got Swordbreaker. Those are rank 6s, so they get 1,200 more attack. That makes Force Focus a 4,000 attack monster, in which case I would suggest running it, yes. But it also enables it to be used as Xyz material for an effect. At the moment, again, it's all of the Xyz monsters that are currently in the game only require 1 material to use their effect. When it comes to the point where they need 2, that is when this card's effect will kind of kick in. But until then, it's okay. It could be run of as a 1 or 2 of. I would not consider running more than 2 because it's just going to clog up your hand. You think your deck is really advised to be, you know, no more than about 20-something cards. Otherwise, you just end up with a bit of a disaster. So we have Xyz Override. This is a field spell, and the effect is if an Xyz monster on the field would activate its effect by detaching its own Xyz material, its controller can banish 1 card from their hand face down instead of detaching 1 of those Xyz materials. Each player can only use this effect once per turn. The interesting thing about this is this can be used by both players, so if your opponent is playing an Xyz strategy as well, this isn't advised to use, especially if they're running some of the bigger ones. The other thing is, you're banishing 1 card face down. That means you're not going to be able to recover it, because banishing something face down, we don't have any recovery for that at the moment in Duel Links. There's a couple in the existing game, but not here. So unless it's really that trash a card you've got, it's better to just use the Xyz materials as they were intended. The final card from the rares is the normal spell card Bujin Incarnation. If your opponent controls a monster and you control no monsters, target 1 Bujin monster in your graveyard, and 1 of your banished Bujin monsters special summon both targets. They can't be used as Xyz material for an Xyz summon, except for the Xyz summon of a beast warrior, or winged beast type monster. So there is a bit of flexibility with this card. Many of the Bujin cards which support the beast warriors, they banish themselves to trigger some of the graveyard effects. So you will be in a position where you will have a Bujin both in the graveyard and that's banished. The other thing as well is, you know, you've probably got Xyz. You will have Xyz monsters, maybe not now, but probably later, of the various attributes, and it only requires you to go into those types, rather than, say, you have to go directly into a Bujin monster. That can help to surprise your opponent. Generally speaking, I think it's quite flexible, and I like the idea of this card. So my personal opinion of these rares are, they're okay. I mean, they're not intended to be overpowered, you know, broken or anything. I think they do what they need to. Out of the list, I would say probably my favourite is Granosaurus. It's easy enough to bring out. It's a rank 3 Xyz monster. And my least favourite card is probably the green Dustin, just because, as far as I remember, the Dustins don't really do much unless you've got their boss monster. Every other one tends to just have a negative effect on you. So until we get those cards, the Dustins aren't going to be viable at all. Whatever you think, leave your comments down below. Like the video if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe for more of your daily Yu-Gi-Oh content.